How are we doing today? It's it's another beautiful Saturday, and I trust we are enjoying this weekend. So today, like we promised, we are going to be continuing our Azure Administrator series, and we have quite a number of topics lined up for everyone, and I'm sure this promises to be interesting, right? So I would just say grab your paper, grab your pen, or if you have a notepad on your phone, and try to see what you can learn. All right. So I'm going to be discussing on administering governance and compliance, right? So, how do we administer governance and compliance in Azure? How do we administer governance and compliance in Azure? And I know that, this is going to be quite an interesting session for everyone. All right, let's move ahead. On this particular section, um, we will be discussing subscriptions and accounts. This is going to be the first topic we are going to be talking about: subscriptions and accounts. So you may be wondering, right? What is subscription? What is accounts? Right? So when talking about this, you there are certain things you really need to consider. Certain things you need to consider, and one of the things you need to consider is region. So whenever you mention subscription, whenever you mention account, one thing you need to consider is the region. Now, what people basically look at is, for instance, I want to deploy a server in Azure. One of the things I would always look at is how close is this region to where I am, right? So, what you want to be able to achieve is that you want to be able to, what's the word? Get a data center that is actually closer to you or closer to the region where you are, right? That's one of the things you want to be able to achieve. So here as you can see, it says, like, the region itself is like the represents a collection of data centers. So one beautiful thing Azure did is that in Azure you have a region. A region is broken down into availability zones, right? In those availability zones, or in those zones, you have, let me say, data centers. So the data center is like, in terms of regional regions, your data center is like the smallest unit, right? So you have a data center in a zone, and then you have zones in a region, right? So that is like the ways which we group, the system. And when looking at regions, like I said, you want to be able to consider flexibility and scaling. You also want to consider your data residency. You understand where you're going to be keeping that data. One of the instances I know is that, like, let's say, for instance, in your country, there is this particular law that says you can't deploy a server, right, outside of that region. That is where your country is. So if you're going to be picking a one of those regions in Azure, you would like to pick something close to your country or in your country. You would like to pick a data center or a region that is located in your country, right? So those are some of the scenarios where region comes in. Like you can see, you want to also select regions that are close to users. That is one thing you want to do. You want to select regions that are close to users. Also, you want to be aware of region deployment availability. Now, the interesting thing with Azure is the fact that Azure gives you a medium where you can decide to choose your primary region and your secondary region. Now, those of you who are into, I would say, those of you who are into, what's the word I would use? Maybe storing of data, or you have a service that needs to always be on, right? You have a service where you need to always see that service running. One of the things you would naturally want to consider is that what happens if this region, for instance, goes down, right? You want to ensure that, okay, there is another region that is existing which I can just switch to and make that region my primary region, right? That's what you want to be able to ensure that you do. So that's the interesting part about this. Another thing you also want to consider is that global services that are region independent. So there are some services in Azure that you make use of that are not dependent on your region. Those services are not dependent on region. So, I mean, anyone from any region can actually make use of those services. And then you have regions are paired for high availability. So, yes, just like I spoke to you just now about primary and secondary regions, right? You also have pairings, right? So maybe you could pair East US with West US, or let's say Northeast with Southeast, something like that. So we have similar pairings like this in Azure to ensure that you are able to have a very high availability when deploying your service. All right, we will be moving ahead. Another thing we want to look at right now is what? Azure subscription. We want to take a look at Azure subscription. What is it when they really say, oh, I have a subscription in Azure? I mean, that's something everybody wants to know, right? You want to be able to find out, okay, when someone tells you, yes, I have a region in Azure. Okay, so one of the things you would naturally do or consider when talking about a region is, or sorry, about your subscription, is you're talking about something that, like, an identity that is used to recognize you in the Azure namespace. Like an identity, you can see here it says only identities in Azure AD or in a directory that are trusted by Azure AD can create a subscription. So, in other words, you are actually tied to your Azure AD or your Azure Active Directory, meaning that you have an identity which Azure uses to recognize you. So, every resource you are going to be deploying is tied to your subscription. And that is what Azure will use to know who is actually deploying what and what service belongs to what. And this also helps you to be able to fine tune things such as your costing and other services you may want to run. Also, you see here it says logical unit of Azure services that is linked to an Azure account. So, I mean, your subscription is like that logical unit, right? To all your services. So, I mean, there is virtually no service you're going to be deploying in Azure that is not going to be tied to that subscription, right? And then you also, one of the reasons why you want to have a subscription is, one, security and billing boundary, right? So imagine if everybody now could create resources in Azure and there's no boundary and there's no what's the word to use, there's no boundary and there's no I mean, everyone can just deploy their resources, and you'll be wondering who does this resource belong to. So one of the interesting things and feature that creating a subscription does for you in Azure is that it helps you with security. So imagine you want to secure some of the services which you're running, right? The first thing you want to go is, which subscription is this resource running on? Then you begin to track how you can start securing that resource. Also, it helps you with billing, because one of the beautiful things is that you can actually specify, or you can create like a budget and say, okay, for this particular month, I don't want to be able to exceed this amount in making use of this resource. And Azure is going to be able to help you track your usage until you get to that amount. I mean, isn't that beautiful? Yeah, so that is one of the things you want to be able to do, right? That's one of the things you want to be able to do. Okay, so moving on, like I said, we will be moving to the how do you get a subscription, right? So yeah, you are an Azure user and you want to understand how to get a subscription. Well, one of the fastest ways, right? One of the fastest ways to get a subscription, one of the fastest ways to get a subscription is to go to portal.azure.com, and then you sign up. That's one of the fastest ways you can get a subscription. And for this is a quick tip for those of you who are wondering, oh, am I going to start spending money? No. So now, the beautiful thing with Azure that Azure does is this, right? As a new person who is coming into the environment, Azure gives you free $200 credit. So if you want to create a subscription in Azure now to test some of the services Azure has, you are actually given $200 to test that. So that $200 is going to be running for 30 days, which is just like a month, right? So in a month, you're going to be making use of that $200, and then you can deploy certain services to test around. Now, there is a caveat to that, right? Now, there are certain resources that you deploy that finishes your $200 in like 5 minutes, right? So Azure would usually give you a guideline and tell you this, okay, if you want to test run the environment using these $200, there are certain services that Azure has provided for you that if you use these services as described by Azure, you are going to be able to use that $200 for a full month. For a full month. So those services are the services you want to make use of in test running your or test running or doing your some tests on Azure. Once you go outside of those services Azure has prescribed for you, you are going to be dealing with expenses, extra expenses. All right, so getting a subscription, right? One of the things you want to look at here is enterprise agreement, right? So it's either you make upfront monetary commitment and consume services throughout the year. This is basically for major or big companies, right? That deploy quite a huge number of resources, right? This is for companies that deploy a huge number of resources. So what happens here is that you have this agreement with Azure, right? Either through one of the marketing managers in Azure or probably a technical account manager. Yes, you can always get a technical account manager assigned to you in Azure. And one of the things you can discuss with your technical account manager is, oh, I want to have an enterprise agreement, right? I want to have an enterprise agreement. And one of the things he's going to give you the rules of engagement. What are you expected to commit to? In other words, What is the deposit you need to drop in order for you to make use of this kind of subscription, right? There is also the resellers part of the subscription. This category of people provide what we call a simple, flexible way to purchase cloud services. So I will call them like, one, these guys, they purchase this subscription in bulk and then they sell them to you depending on who is approaching them for the services. Another one is the partners, right? One of the beautiful things the Azure or Microsoft partners do for you is that they can actually help you design and implement your Azure cloud solution. Say, for instance, you need to deploy a specific kind of service, right? And then you're wondering, okay, how do I deploy this service? Yeah, you're wondering, how do I deploy this service? Yes, one of the ways you can actually um, deploy this service is by talking to one of Microsoft partners. What they will do is that they will give you a design and explain to you how you can be able to implement this design which they've given to you. Another thing is the personal free account, which I actually started with. So for the personal free account, you get $200, right? You get $200 and you can make use of that subscription in 30 days. All right, moving ahead. We are going to be looking at subscription usage, right? Yeah, so this is what I was just telling you about. The subscription, $200 credit for the first 30 days, free limited access for 12 months. So for the first 30 days, you have access to this $200, right? But then you can make use of the free services, the free limited access for 12 months, right? Those are the ones you can make use of. So also, another type of subscription that people use in Azure is the pay as you go subscription. So some people don't really have money to, or they are not that, financially boxed up to be able to deploy, or let's say make a huge commitment. Now, one of the beautiful things Azure does is that it provides an option for you to actually pay as you make use of the services. So that's why they've termed this pay as you go. Sorry about that. What this does is that it just gives you the opportunity to be able to pay as little as you are making use of, so that you don't have to deal with very high costs. The third one we want to look at is the CSP, the cloud solution providers. That's what we call them, the CSP, cloud solution providers. Now, agreement with possible discount through a Microsoft cloud solution provider partner, typically for small to medium businesses. So, sorry about that. One of the things you get to enjoy about Azure is that you can actually speak to Azure agents, or like I said, a technical account manager, make an agreement, and then you guys can work up a special discount for you depending on what you want to build or how you want to make use of the Azure services. So I mean, these are tips that a lot of people don't know about, and then they end up going to spend so much money when they can actually have a solution that could benefit them. Another type for the subscription usage is called the enterprise. Just like I said, the enterprise is one agreement with discount for new licenses and software assurance targeted at enterprise scale organizations. So for very, very large organizations, I mean, you don't want to pay for every license you make use of. So in order to enjoy how you are making use of those licenses, you can go for this plan, and then it handles your bulk licensing and all of that. Right. Now, Apart from the free package I talked to you about, if you're a student here, Azure has a package for you, which is $100 for 12 months, right? But, there is a but. The but is that you must have a verified student email address. So Azure must be able to verify your student email address, right? Once they are able to verify your email address, then you can have access to the student subscription. All right. Okay. So we are going to be talking about cost management, right? We are going to be talking about cost management. And this is one very beautiful session, right? I mean, cost management is something everyone is worried about. The reason why everyone is worried about is the reason why everyone is worried about this is due to the fact that, I mean, it's cost. And when it comes to cost, you want to ensure that you have you are not spending or overspending, right? You want to ensure that you are not spending or overspending. But before I go into the cost management, I want you to take a look at this one of these videos that we discussed in the Microsoft Ignite session, right? Just take a look at this quick advertisement that talks more on the Azure service. So we'll be right back after this, right?
Kom naar de Microsoft Ignite Afterparty om met je peers te gaan praten over de laatste aankondigingen van Microsoft en hoe jij ermee aan de slag gaat.
To explore all announcements around Microsoft Ignite and products that has been presented in there and go deeper to further explore these technologies, try out some cool demos and have a tangible experience of these products.
Wissenstransfer, Diskussionen und Treffen mit Technikbegeisterten in einer angenehmen Atmosphäre bietet die Ignite After Show in Österreich.
Porque es una experiencia increíble de compartir e interactuar y sobre todo adquirir nuevos conocimientos de una forma poco común.
Microsoft Ignite After Parties helps the communities to engage with the young leaders by inspiring them with the stories of tech innovation.
Es el espacio perfecto para compartir ideas y opiniones para revolucionar el mundo a través de la tecnología.
为了透过微软与世界接轨。
All right, welcome back. So that was some of the things you get to see during the Ignite session that we just finished. But all right, let's continue on this. Let's continue on this, talking about Azure and the cost management, right? Okay, so just like I said, one thing you really want to be concerned about is the budget. You want to ensure that you are not spending so much. At the same time, you are getting the effect or the maximum use for whatever cost you are paying. All right, so how do you do this? How do you get to do this? One of the ways you can get to do this is you can conduct a cost analysis. So all of this you're going to be seeing here, I would actually do a demo and show you in the Azure portal how you can get to see all of this. So like I said, one of the things you want to see is what? Conduct a cost analysis. This cost analysis will help you to know, okay, let's say in a month, what do I spend on making use of an SSD drive in Azure? Now, you have a figure right in your head, right? Or let's say, for instance, you have different departments in your office. In this scenario here, just like we painted here, in this particular scenario, let's say the department here is the storage department. Now, when you do an analysis, you can be able to tell that, okay, the storage department is taking about $3,800. You can also be able to take, okay, those responsible for Azure Stack, what are they making use of? About $7,500. So once you have this analysis based on the services you're running, you are able to identify each and every cost based on those services. And then you are now able to plan ahead. So take, for instance, after conducting your analysis, you discover that you make use of 7,000 every month, right? Now, you want to ensure that you don't go past this amount. What you can then do is come to the second option here. You create a budget. What does creating a budget helps you do? Creating a budget helps you to restrict how much you're spending. So once you create a budget in Azure, what you would notice is that budget, there's going to be like this scale here. You're going to see once you are closing to that budget, you begin to get alerts, you begin to get warnings telling you that, oh, you are getting close to your budget. Just something like this, as you can see, you get warning signals like this telling you you are actually getting close to your budget. Now, with that idea, you can either decide to reduce the usage or find some other means to ensure that you do not beat your budget. But the idea of creating a budget is, before you create a budget, it is always good to conduct a cost analysis so that you don't create a budget that is under-efficient or create a budget that is over-efficient. So, doing a very proper cost analysis helps you to give an appropriate budget to every service you are going to be making use of in Azure. And then once you've created the service, you can then review recommendations and export your data. So just like I was saying, how does this really work in the Azure environment? Let me give you a typical scenario where you are able to make use of, where you are able to conduct a cost analysis in Azure. Just a moment. Let me pull up my screen. All right. So I have Azure open here. I'm going to be moving this here. Yes, I'm going to be moving this here. All right. So now what this is going to show to you is what we were talking about when we were talking about the budget. So I will go to my subscription. I would click on my subscription, right? Of course, remember I informed you earlier that your subscription is like the building block of everything. Every resource you're going to be creating is tied to your subscription. All right. So once you've done that, the next thing you want to check is that you want to check the cost analysis. So you can see here, cost management. So, just open your Azure portal, go to portal.azure.com, and then you go to your subscription by clicking on the subscription, which looks like a key, and then you just select the cost management. Now, with this, I am able to, With this, I am able to see what I am actually spending on my subscription. And then once I know what I'm spending, I can now do a cost analysis. And then after a cost analysis, I can now do a budget. So Right now, you can see on my personal subscription that I have just spent $19.57, right? You can see that I have just spent that. And here, just as we saw earlier, you could see the grouping, right? This is telling me that Azure App Service is taking $8.70. The storage is taking $3.98. Virtual machine is taking $3.85. So I now have an understanding of each of these services being provided and how much they are costing me. Now that I know that, I can either now decide to do an alert. I can decide to now do a budget alert. So what the budget alert would just be like, having a budget where you can specify, okay, this is the service, this is how much I want to spend. So here you can see that once I clicked on budget, I can now decide to give the budget any name. I could say this is the budget I want to make use of in my virtual machine services. This is the budget I want to make use of for the virtual machine services. I could then specify the billing period. Do I want to make it monthly? Do I want to make it quarterly? Do I want to make it yearly? All of that. This I can specify here. And then the date I want to start and the date I want it to end. So, for instance, I could pick a month. I could say this is for virtual machine, right? So you could say this. I could say this is for virtual machine, and then since it's a month, I could just okay. I could either decide to do this and then choose 2022 as well, and choose for the next month, which is what, November, right? And then I can then specify my, okay, give your budget amount threshold. What is the threshold you want to be able to keep your budget on? So maybe I can specify that I just want it to be what, $50. So you can see here, view of monthly cost data. You can see this. So this was what I used in April. This was what I used in May, June, July, August, September, October. And you can see the lowest of this all is what, the September budget, right? Now, once that is done, I can now decide to create some kind of alerts, either actual or forecasted, specify the percentage of the budget. So what it is saying is this. Say, for instance, you have $100 and you want, for instance, to be alerted when you have used up to about 75% of your $100. So what you do is you come and create a budget, right? And then you specify at what percentage do you want to be alerted for the system to let you know that you are making use of this amount of resources, right? So you pick that, and then you can pick your mail. Yes. So Azure can actually send you a mail when you are making use of those services, right? Yes. You can get a mail that will tell you of the amount you've used while you were making use of your services. All right. So moving ahead, once you fill in all of this, you can now decide to create. So once you create, what to do is that it will actually create a budget for you. All right, so let's go back to our training, talking about the cost management. Yeah. So we move to the next slide. Resource tags. Resource tags. What are resource tags? Right? What are resource tags? So just a minute, please. Yes. What are resource tags? So just imagine that you're running an organization and you have like 5 different departments, and each of these departments are spinning up similar resources. How would you tell who in the department is is creating what, and who in the organization is eating the highest amount of money. How do you do that? One of the ways you can do that, is by actually making use of the resource tags. What the resource tags is going to do for you is this. At the point of creating a resource, you tag that resource. You can say, okay, you can tag it name of the organization, hyphen the department, hyphen maybe you have several teams in the department, hyphen the name of the team. So all the resources that are going to be created are going to be created in that format with everything stated just the way you mentioned it. I'm going to show you something like that and try to create a resource for you to see, right? So you will see here, it says provides metadata for your Azure resources, logically organizes resources into a taxonomy, which is like a breakdown of those resources, right? Like in a, what's the word? A step-by-step format, and also consists of a name per value, right? A name per value. And it says what? Very useful for rolling up billing information. I mean, you see this particular service, this resource tag, you don't know how important it is until your MD, your managing director, tells you as the Azure administrator to bring the cost of what the account department is making use of in Azure, or he asks you to bring the cost of what the developers are making use of in your organization. This is where this particular service is very, very, very useful. I mean, you'll be so happy that you made use of your resource tags, because why? All of your resources will be tagged in the format which you did the same. So I will be creating a virtual machine now, and I'm going to show you how to actually make use of this resource tag. So join me as I do that. Just a minute. I'm going to go to home. Okay, I'm going to go to home, and then I'm going to move over to, I can either do it two ways, right? I can either do it two ways. One, I go straight to virtual machines here, or you can see the virtual machine here. But in case you don't have that in your own environment, what you can do is just come here and type virtual machine, and you can see it comes up. So I can go here and click on this, right? And then I click on the create field. Let me see if I can make this bigger for those of us who are not able to see my screen clearly. All right. Also, as I'm actually explaining this, please, if you don't understand anything, feel free to drop in your questions, right? And sure, I'm going to provide answers as much as I can, right? Yes, I see my Mick2 saying good afternoon. Hello, Mick2. How you doing? All right, so I'm going to create a resource, a virtual machine, and try to tag that virtual machine, right? You can see here, I click on the create button, and I'm going to choose create a virtual machine hosted by Azure, because you have various options, but I'm going to be checking the one by Azure. Right, so once I click on that, it gives me this form to fill. So in this form here, I can then specify what subscription do I want to make use of, what resource group. So for the resource group, I could decide to make use of an existing resource group, right? And then I could give the virtual machine a name. So I can say, let the virtual machine name be Azure class. Azure class, right? And then I can choose the region East US, right? Availability zone, I can choose zone 1. I make use of standard x64 architecture. Size, I just make use of this size. You can see I'm actually doing this because it's way easier. Let me make use of the password. So I could, for the username, I could do this, right? And I could do this. All right, so I have that configured, and the next thing I'm going to do is go to the disk. I really don't have anything to choose here because I want these settings, right? So the next thing I'm going to do is the virtual network. I can make use of the default virtual network, right? And then the next thing I'm going to do is the management, right? Where I get to select or show how I make use of maybe probably my notifications or my shutdown time and all of that. And the next thing I'm going to go into is called monitoring, right? Do you want a boot diagnosis of the virtual machine to be able to see what happens when the virtual machine boots up? Fine. All right. The next thing that we are going to be working on, or we are going to be looking at, is the advanced session. For the advanced session, this case, you make use of it when you want to add like custom scripts that can be deployed, right, while the virtual machine is in the world being deployed. Probably you want to install some things, right, just before the virtual machines are finally deployed. So you can make use of the custom data here, right? Um, thank you, Miktu. I can see your door. Yes. All right. So same thing with the hosts. If you want to pick a dedicated host, fine. If you want to make use of the default setting, that's as well fine. And then here is what I talked about. So you can see here 12 resources about to be deployed right now as you create the virtual machine, right? So what do you want to use to tag those resources? What you want to make use of in tagging those resources, you can either decide to give it a name. Say, let me say, for instance, your organization name is, I will take, for instance, let me say Mackenzie, right? And the value, let's say, is the account department. So what this means is that for every resource that's going to be deployed, it's going to tag all of those resources Mackenzie accounts, meaning that this particular resource belongs to what? The accounting section in Mackenzie. I don't know if this is making sense. Yeah, let me know in the comment section if this is actually making sense to you. Just actually send those questions in the comment section. All right. So, I mean, once you're able to do that, you are now able to gauge and see, okay, well, all of these resources belongs to the account team in McKinsey. And then you can go forward to what? Review and create. You can go forward to then review and create, right? So once you do a review and create, you get to see all of the things which you've picked all in one section. So you can see this. You can see this. So these are all of the resources, and then you get to see your name tagging as well. So you can see here, this is the tagging of all the resources that will be created if you go ahead with that particular deployment. Right? So now you can see all the taggings to each of those particular resource. All right, so this just basically explains to you how you can actually create your tags in the virtual machine. Now, moving ahead, we can then talk about the next thing, which is cost savings. Yeah, cost savings. Now, for the cost savings, what you want to do for the cost savings, what you want to do is you want to see how do you make use of the available benefits in Azure to ensure that while you are making use of the services you want, you are not borderline cutting your neck to pay for them, right? And one of the ways you can do this is by getting to have a knowledge on the benefits that Azure provide for you. So let me give you the first instance, Azure reservations. One of the ways Azure reservations helps you to save costs is this. If, for instance, it will normally take you $500 to run a virtual machine all through the year, or let me say $500 to run a virtual machine in a month, right? Let's say, for instance, you have the type of the virtual machine you want to use. Let's say probably it's a 4 gig RAM, a 250 hard drive, right? That's what you want to use. Now, you know that if you're making use of this virtual machine for 500 for a month, it means that in a year, you're going to be paying how much? 500 times 12, which is roughly 6,000, right? So that means that in a year, you're going to be paying $6,000 if you make use of this particular virtual machine. Now, what Azure reservations is doing for you is this. Instead of paying that money in bits, 5,000, 5,000, or 500, 500, 500, what you can actually do is raise a ticket with Azure and ask that you want to make use of the Azure reservations, right? Now, make a commitment of, I don't know if it's up to 6 months or 4 months, make the first commitment, right, in terms of paying for that service in advance, right? Then once you've made the first commitment, you can now have further negotiations with either your manager or a senior person in the organization. You can then have further discussions based on the price. So if you're going for the Azure reservation, you remember this time around, you are going to be given a cost for the whole year. So you can now disclose or discuss with your users how you want to pay that cost, right? So with this, you find yourself seeing that it's actually paying you more. So if you were to pay $6,000 for the year, once you go for Azure reservations, what you'll be paying will be maybe, let me say, amounting to $4,000. So in this case now you have saved $2,000. Doesn't it make sense? Don't you think it's a good plan? So if you know you're making use of a virtual machine for long, for regular, one of the things you want to do is go for the Azure reservations feature. That way you get to spend less for making use of exactly the same amount of services that you make use of, right? The next thing you want to do is, or consider, is what the Azure hybrid benefits. So when we say Azure hybrid benefit, is that there are some servers you're running in Azure, or you may have brought in from your local environment to Azure, but those servers have like some licensing even before you brought them to Azure, right? So Azure hybrid benefit is more like you saying, okay, fine, I have these on-premises licenses for this, but in the meantime, can I make use of this service? Right? So in the meantime, what happens is, instead of you to pay the full amount, you will pay for all of your certificates, for your website that is up, all of that. What you can do is, if I'm just now saying is, if you have an existing license, bring that license to Azure, right? Let that license be covered in your account or something like that. So instead of you to now pay for another license in Azure, that money will be deducted from your account expenses in Azure. So that's what we call the Azure hybrid benefits. Same thing with the Azure credit, which is like one of the beautiful things that Azure has done to ensure that students are able to grab and understand the platform, and that it's not just all about making swags and all of that, but then understanding how this works, right? And then also regions can help you with low costing budget as well. They can help you with low costing budget as well. All right, let's move ahead. Azure policy. And then you may be wondering, what is Azure policy? So just the same way every other engagement works, right? Azure policy is a way which you ensure that you create certain policies that you want to be prevalent in your organization. Take, for instance, now you have a very big organization, and you know that some people might not put that into consideration when deploying some resources. So, therefore, you now say, okay, every resource that apartment A is going to create has to be divided probably into two. You will now say, okay, um, um, this is what it looks like, right? And then in your mind, you're like, um, how do I specify what of VM that this department can run? And then with the Azure policy, you just go in there, state what you want to do, and then you are good to go, right? So you can then, with the Azure policy, you can then limit. You can say, okay, in US is 2, all I want is just what's the word? You can then say all you want, right, is maybe all VM should be A2. Once you have a policy in the environment that says that any VM that any person is going to be deploying in, no matter the environment where they are, is going to be an A2 VM. Any person who tries to create another type of VM will be automatically what's the word? Will be automatically not allowed to do so. In fact, the moment you're trying to create a VM, you get an error saying that there is a policy that is forbidding you from doing that. So that's how important a policy is in Azure. A policy helps, you can create policies that, okay, you don't want people to be able to delete resources, right? Or you want, like, what's the word I will call it? You want to fine grain, or like, yes, you want to fine grain who can actually have access to what resource. You can actually create policies targeting towards each of that. So you can see here, under your policies, you have the management group, which provides a level of scope above the subscription. So for the management group, it means that you are dealing with multiple subscriptions for the management group. Right. Another thing is this targeting of policies and spend budget across subscriptions and inheritance down the hierarchies. So you might be wondering, what is inheritance? So why is Azure talking of inheritance? So sometimes some resources are tied to what's the word? Older accounts, right? And resources are tied to older accounts. How do you get to find out? Is having something like this that gets to check, or you can even go to the portal and actually check, what you can even go to the portal and actually check, what policy do you have for what department, and are those policies being effective, or probably, it's not being effective. All right, the next thing you want to do is this. You can see here, it says Azure policy is a service in Azure that helps you to create, assign, and manage policies, right? The policy itself helps you reevaluate and scan for non-compliant resources, right? Once you're able to evaluate and scan for non-compliant resources, your policy, if you want to be able to do that, your policy has to be tight to be able to ensure that it can, you can run the evaluations and scan for non-compliant resources. All right, so I know, yes, it may look like as if time is going, but I would like you to, if you have any questions based on what we are discussing, please just drop your questions in the comment section. I'm going to provide answers to them as much as I can. Right. So you can see here, Azure Policy runs evaluations and scans for non-compliant resources, and then it gives you an update and says, oh, these services in your solution are actually non-compliant. And one of the advantages, or one of them advantages, is that one, enforcement and compliance. It helps you to enforce those policies which you have created, then applies policies at scale, and then remediation. Right? So that means you are able to apply policies in scale and enforce them, making use of what the Azure policy, the making use of what the Azure policy. So you can see here it mentions some use cases. Right, you can see here it mentions some use cases. So we'll be moving ahead to implementing Azure policy. Right, so all of these things we've been saying now has boiled down to one thing, right? You want to be able to ensure that you can browse your policy definition, you can create them, you can scope them to the right amount, to the right account, and then you can view the policy evaluation results, right? Moving ahead, you can see this here. It says many policy definitions are available. You can improve policies from GitHub, right? And then policy definitions have a specific JSON format that they follow in order to create these resources. In order to create these resources. All right. All right. So I know we have just a few minutes, but I'm going to try to explain as much as I can. And then show you what it's like to create a policy in the Azure environment. So let's go to the Azure environment and let's go to Azure policy. Can I just go to policy here? Yeah, policy. So you remember when we were talking about the fact that policy helps us to here, I remember we spoke about it here. We says you can view evaluation results. You can also create custom imports. Yeah. Okay. I remember where we talked about the parts. Yes, look at this. Remember when we talked about this part, it says Azure policy runs evaluations and scans for non-compliant resources. So you can see here, Azure policy actually scanned my own environment for non-compliant resources, and then it reported the environment to me. So it can even give you like some email if something strange is actually happening in the environment. But you can see here, it's able to tell us, that 13 resources are non-compliant, exempt is 0, and then complaint is 2, right? And then you can see overall resource compliance is what? 13%. Right? You can see here that overall resource compliance is what? 13%, which is, I would say, is actually poor, to be honest. Right? So here is where the policy is, and then you can decide to go ahead and create your own policy. You can see either you create a resource group, or let me say I make use of this, then I can now specify what policy do I want to actually make use of. You can see here, I can now choose whatever resource group I want. And then once I click on select, right, you can see it displays this for me. If I want to be able to, what's the word? Okay, let me see select. Okay, so what is actually doing is actually giving me some old configurations which I have done earlier. But anyway, here is how you get to create your own policy. So you can see you can print content, copy title, and then And then let's see policy. Yeah, here. So here you can now define. Let me see if I can see where I need to define those ones. Okay. Okay. So here it just basically tells you of the policies you have existing in that environment. Let me see if I can pick what subscription I want to work on. Okay, let me pick the two of them and select. Yeah, so you can see here is that this what you see here is actually a total combination of different um two different what's the word subscriptions. So it tells me the overall results for the two different subscriptions. So this is basically how your subscriptions work, and this is how you can be able to manage them. And like I said, the overall concept for today was actually understanding how to govern, and administer your Azure subscription. So with the few ones or the few sections we've been able to go today, I am just hoping that you were able to get one or two explanations that I explained here. And at this time, we might have to stop the class, but the good news is we are going to continue next week. Now, one of the things I want you to always do whenever we schedule our events or our sessions is registration. Now, each time you see the registration link, try as much as possible to ensure that you register. The purpose is that once you register, we send out emails of the links we are going to be using for the classes, and also we are going to be able to engage you on future events that we are going to be hosting. So please ensure to always register for our events, and then plan ahead for our next class, which is going to be taken up on the next week, Saturday. So at this point, I asked for questions, but no one dropped questions. So I'm just guessing that everyone was able to understand me, and you were able to understand all of the things I was explaining to you on this particular session. So for now, I would just like to say thank you everyone for attending this session, and I look forward to seeing you in our session, which will be happening next week, Saturday as well. I look forward to seeing you there, and then we are going to be continuing this series. So, it's been a wonderful day, and at this time, I would have to say bye-bye. See you, everyone.
Kom naar de Microsoft Ignite Afterparty om met je peers te gaan praten over de laatste aankondiging van Microsoft en hoe jij ermee aan de slag gaat.
To explore all announcements around Microsoft Ignite and products that have been presented in there, and go deeper to further explore these technologies, try out some cool demos, and have a tangible experience of these products.
Wissenstransfer, Diskussionen und Treffen mit Technikbegeisterten in einer angenehmen Atmosphäre bietet die Ignite After Show in Österreich.
Porque es una experiencia increíble de compartir e interactuar, y sobre todo adquirir nuevos conocimientos de una forma poco común.
Microsoft Ignite After Parties helps the communities to engage with the young leaders while inspiring them with the stories of tech innovation.
Es el espacio perfecto para compartir ideas y opiniones para revolucionar el mundo a través de la tecnología.
为了透过微软与世界接轨，